Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Alex.
March Madness is here.
You're very excited, are you?
I am so thrilled.
Who's going to win?
I haven't filled out my bracket yet.
Okay, all right.
So I haven't done
clicked
the
auto
study.
button. I said Houston. That's what it told me. So
I'm hoping to see them tomorrow.
Oh, wow. All right.
Which would be Saturday when this airs. So
That's good.
I'll be in Wichita watching the games.
That's a fun time. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We have two very special guests with us today. We have Marcos and Christy. I'm going to say this my best ability because we were talking about this, and I always feel so much pressure. Jácome?
You got it.
Is that good? Okay.
Jácome, that sounds good.
Okay, we're close. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate that. Why don't the two of you let's start out by just hearing a little bit about who you are, your background, and I'll let you guys pick who goes first.
You want to go first?
Okay. I'm Christy. Let's see. I don't know. We have 3 kids. They're 8, 6, and 2. 2 boys and a girl. I am in education. I'm in education. So I've been, I think, 17 years.
Oh, wow.
Have done a lot of different things, but always worked with language learners, whether English language learners or Spanish language learners. So I'm currently an instructional facilitator at a public school around here, and I work at a dual language school. So kids get instruction half in English and half in Spanish, which is where our kids go also, our oldest 2. So,
Awesome. Cool. Great.
yeah.
Marcos, how about?
Okay. My name is Marcos. I'm from Ecuador. And as Christy said, we have, 3 kids. I work in the cybersecurity field. I'm a cybersecurity engineer. I've been doing IT for a long time, but that wasn't. Yeah, and I went to college twice. Actually, once in Ecuador, when I was talking to you, I was a sound engineer, and in the U.S., I just got a management information systems and computer science degree from Omaha.
Wow.
So I hope Omaha wins the March Madness.
Yes, that's who you're. Okay, the first time in it. I would love
Mavericks.
I would love the Mavericks to win it. Let's go. That'd be awesome. I don't think the fate. I mean, it's in their favor, but if they win the first game, that'd be awesome.
Well, I mean, we could just have a sports podcast. Just throw it out there. No, we invited you here today because we wanted to talk a little bit just kind of about your experience of, marriage. And then Marcos, you immigrated to America and what that experience was like, and kind of bring people closer in proximity to what that's like. Because I think a lot of times in the American life, we find ourselves very comfortable and sometimes maybe not unwilling to learn or experience different things. But if it doesn't affect us directly, we, just stay in our comfort. But to lighten things up a little bit, you guys have prepared a couple trivia questions for us. Yeah. So see how much Alex and I know about Ecuador. This is going to be really telling here how cultured we are.
Yes.
So go ahead whenever you're ready to see if we know anything here.
Okay, so the first one is, Ecuador is home to one of the highest active volcanoes in the world. What is the name of it?
We've got 4 options.
Okay.
The first option is Cotopaxi. The second one is Kilimanjaro, Everest, or Ojos de Salado.
Okay.
I am gonna eliminate Kilimanjaro and Everest and go with Cotopaxi. That's my answer, Eric. What's your answer?
I don't, man.
I've seen that on shirts at least, and
yeah,
it's a brand, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
I'm trying to deduce my answer based on what little Spanish I know, and I really don't know. Boy.
Do I need the Jeopardy music to start playing here?
I guess I feel bad just saying what you said, but that's the one that makes the most sense to me. So I'm stealing Alex's answer as well. Which one were we right?
That's
correct. You got it.
Okay. All right. All right.
Pressure's off. We got one.
Can you the last option? How does that translate into English? Does it, or is that just a name of an actual volcano?
Eyes of the Salty River, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Well, it's not in Ecuador.
It's not in Ecuador, so we're good. Got it.
All right.
Okay, next one. What is one household pet? Something you might find as a pet in the U.S. that might be eaten in Ecuador.
Okay.
I feel like this is a risky thing to answer in some ways.
Well, I put it out there, right? I mean,
Yeah, I hope this doesn't break my kid's heart because
Sorry,
we
families.
have a hamster, but do you eat hamster in Ecuador? I don't know.
it's not hamster.
Okay.
I
Not a
eliminated one answer that you were thinking, Eric, so I made it easy for you.
Thank you. It's a household pet. Man, I don't know. Some people have pigs as pets, but that's probably cheating. What about like some sort of a bird? I don't know. Like a parakeet.
A parakeet. Okay. How did we do?
Terribly.
Okay, thank you.
No, guinea pig is the answer.
Oh, you were really close.
Yeah,
You were
close
really
enough.
close.
Guinea pig. Sorry, families out there.
Cousin of
And Christy has
hamster.
had it. I've never had it. in my
Marcos
life.
has never.
Oh, yeah.
Is it like a kind of a rare thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like more of a special meal, all in the highlands and
Does it
the
taste like chicken?
mountains. And it's just kind of hard and like just kind of awkward. Like, where do I start if they serve you the whole thing, which they're expensive?
Oh, wow.
I don't know how to eat this, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's not like you're getting a fillet of guinea pig.
I
It's
mean,
they're
you
so
could.
small,
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah, you could.
Not much meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of work for not a lot of meat.
Yes.
All right, how about one more? Let's see if we can at least go over 500.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think you're going to get it. But okay, what are the two main languages spoken in Ecuador?
I will say Espanol,
That's one.
Spanish, okay. And I'm going to phone a friend named Eric for the second.
I'm gonna
Portuguese,
just go out.
that's my other answer. I'll just
is
say
it?
that. But
Oh, okay. I have no idea. French. Just gonna say some other language because I really have no idea.
Quechua.
What is?
Quechua. So
Okay.
that's a native Ecuadorian language.
Oh, wow.
It's
Okay.
like the indigenous speak it
Indigenous,
a lot.
okay.
Oh, wow.
Do you know any of that?
No,
No.
I don't either.
I mean,
there.
a lot of words are mixed in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like ñaño is brother, ñaña sister. Instead of saying hermano or hermana, that will be the words in Spanish.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, if this was our SATs or some other important, like a driver's test, we would have failed, Alex.
It's true.
Thanks for providing that. I mean, I think it's so telling, you know, when cultures kind of collide that way, and it just shows how little people are exposed to. And I don't think that's just uniquely American. I think a lot of times it just depends on where you are. Your location, it matters a lot. And that's, you're just kind of a product of what you're around and what you're exposed to. And when you don't take that effort to reach out and understand other cultures, that's kind of all you're left with is what you know. Yeah. So why don't we get into just a little bit about your backgrounds and how, like, maybe further into Marco's story. We'll start with that. Like, where did you grow up specifically? What was life like for you? And just kind of key us into some of that.
Yeah, so I grew up in Quito, Ecuador, which is the capital of Ecuador. I grew up in, I think I can associate my family to like a middle class family from Ecuador. So that will look very different from, the U.S. perspective. But we used to live, or even my parents are still living in that neighborhood, which it's I would say it's a poor neighborhood. Like not that many middle class or upper class people will live over there, but we did, and it was, like my family will stand out from the rest of the houses and the people in the neighborhood, but it was nice growing up there with people that are at a different economical stage than your family is. And sometimes people will say, especially in Quito, that the bad people, the thieves, the robber, will come in from the south, and that's where my family lives and used to live. So, but yeah, it's interesting also to know that in the north side of the city, which is more developed and more people with more opportunities and more money, like everything works with like a credit card or with plastic money. And then in the south, if you don't have money, there's nothing that you can do without bills or coins.
Wow.
So that's a contrast between the city and how it's divided over there. So So there's a lot of division based on your social economic status, and from what I can see in the U.S., like I think it's easier here to be friends with people that have a lot of money if you don't have a lot of money, and in Ecuador that's not the case. So it's a very classist society.
Okay.
What are some of like the things that make those different? I mean, is it like education, or like what creates the difference in class, or is it, you know, parts of culture maybe that are more native and less native that kind of create those divides, I guess, if that makes sense?
That's an interesting and a good question, because I think I will say, you know, you get judged by your last name. So if you have an indigenous last name, there are less chances for you to keep getting better or improving your social status or your economic status in Ecuador.
Wow.
Also, I will say, you know, there's a lot of old money over there. So you know, if your family has had opportunities and has had means, you know, way back in the past, then that keeps moving on. Unless you are very poor at managing your wealth, and I think that's when you can, you know, don't have the same experience as other people that
Gotcha.
have money. Yeah.
That's helpful.
So, how long did you live in Ecuador before you immigrated?
Yes. So
or?
I lived in Ecuador for most of my life, and
Okay.
until I was 17. That's when my parents were interested in me going to the States to get my
Okay.
senior year of high school done here. So I went to the U.S. for the first time in my life, first time traveling overseas, and I went to California, Indio, California, little town in Southern California.
Did you come with your parents or
No,
alone,
just me.
or
Yeah,
just
just
okay?
me.
Is that like
wow.
as a foreign
Yeah.
exchange student?
Yeah,
essentially?
yeah. So we had
okay.
a connection with a church. So the church that I was going back home used to have a connection. They have a family of missionaries from California, from Calvary Chapel, in one of those churches in California, and they were like, "Hey, we're interested in hosting some internationals here." So that's how I got into that program, and I went there for my senior year of high school.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So California was like your first introduction, but like small town California. So not like LA.
Interesting, because I was expecting to see like more people different than me, and it was funny because like I will say like 70%, 80% of the people over there looked like me, and then there were like maybe the rest of them were like, you know, white Americans and really really little black population, especially at that school.
Interesting.
So.
Wow. And then, I mean, I guess just to fill in the gaps, when did the two of you get married? Was that?
How'd you meet? All that.
Yeah,
kind of
all that
stuff,
sort of stuff. Like, kind of, what's the
Do you want to
timeline?
share a story?
So yeah, so I moved several times when I was growing up. But the last place I was Michigan, like around the University of Michigan. Then I went to college in Indiana, and during that time, like God really gave me a passion for Spanish. No one in my family knew Spanish. Like my whole extended family, I'm the only one. So like Swedish background and like no one. So so that kind of like came out of nowhere. And then I was majoring in education too. It was like I want to work with Spanish speaking kids in the US or abroad. But during my college experience, I went to a Christian college. And during that time, I went overseas a few times. I student taught overseas. So that gave me an idea of like kind of what I was looking for overseas. And then I lived with a family in Ecuador too, just because that's where the program was. And I was like, this is where sometimes I was like, I feel like I was like supposed to be born here. Like I fit really well. Like my personality and stuff, like fit really well in the country. So, yeah. So anyway, when I was looking for jobs, there was a job open at an Christian international school in Ecuador. And I didn't want to teach kindergarten, but that position was open and I was 22 and I was like, sure, I want to go. So I did. So I moved to Ecuador and taught in English, kindergarten, and 5th and 6th grade music because this is a small school and they're like, what are you good at? And okay, you get to teach that. So yeah, so my second year there, my roommate at the time was also a teacher. She had met Marcos through his cousin and was like, do you want to meet his cousin? And I was like, I don't know, you know? And so then she's like, well, let me tell you a little bit about him. What I know about him is that like he's good looking, he loves music, and he loves Jesus. And I'm like, okay, sure.
Checks all the boxes.
Sure. That's a good list. So, yeah. So we met up at a coffee shop and talked for 3 hours.
3 hours.
On the way, I was like, what am I doing? This is
Around
crazy.
this time of the year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So was that just so I'm tracking? Were you in Ecuador at the time when
Yeah.
you met Margaret? And were you back from
Yes.
your time
Totally.
in California? Okay.
So yeah, so I did 1 year of high school in California. Then I had a friend whose family was working for the Ecuadorian government in Washington D.C., but they lived in Maryland. So he's like, called me, he's like, do you want to come and visit? And I'm like, well, I'm already here, so I just flew to Maryland, and I ended up applying for a community college there, and I stayed 2 more years there.
Oh,
and,
wow.
In Maryland, the Washington D.C.
Okay.
area. So that was pretty cool. And then I came back to Ecuador and continued my education, finished that up, and I
Wow.
didn't go back to the U.S. for a long time.
He didn't go back because his passport was stolen. So
Oh yeah, that was true.
it was kind of like,
Wow.
okay, well,
I forgot about that. Yeah,
yeah. The plan
Gotcha.
was not to stay in Ecuador. It was like
yeah.
he was
It
still
was
in
fun,
the
yeah.
U.S.
I
but-
arrived to Ecuador, for Christmas break. I left my backpack in my car. Then we went with my family and had a dinner and started talking. And then we went out to actually put the car in the garage, and we noticed that the car was open and my backpack was gone. And
So was your passport.
Wow.
Okay.
Yep.
Fun. So you guys fast forward, coffee went well, you got married, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you had to probably make a decision. One family lives in the United States, the other in Ecuador. So how did you guys wrestle through some of those decisions of where are we going to get married and where are we going to live? And if we want to have a family, how are we going to do that? I'm sure there's fun that led you to this moment now. So
I loved living in Ecuador. We came up, my parents moved to Omaha during the time I was in Ecuador. So Omaha was just like a place I came for breaks. We didn't intend to live in the U.S. We really liked living in Ecuador, but he wound up working where I was working, and things just at the time weren't, we wanted something different, like it felt like God was just like closing doors. And
Yeah.
so we were like, okay, what does that mean? I looked at other international schools in Ecuador, and it just wasn't,
well, even other parts of the world.
yeah. We didn't have kids. We were,
Yeah.
so yeah, I applied we thought, okay, teacher, let's like, Christy, you apply, and then Marcos.
I do
and
IT, so
I'll just find a job.
Yeah.
potentially find a job there.
Yeah, literally applied to 11 different countries. Why
Wow.
not? Let's just go. And then nothing panned out. And then we came back for Christmas, and my parents knew someone that was, Marcos wanted to go back for his master's. So they knew someone that worked at UNO and tech and stuff. So they met, and then he was like, well, I want to go back to school. So Omaha it was.
And you ended up in Omaha.
Yep.
and now they're in the NCAA tournament. What a run.
So it was never really in our,
Yeah.
Not in the plans.
no.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
usually how life works out, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm curious what one thing, because obviously you've come from both different cultures. What's one thing just in your marriage, or you look back, that is it maybe a quirky tradition or a habit that you've both probably adopted from either culture or families of origin of each other? Like, hey, living in Ecuador or from Marcos's family, I thought this was kind of weird that they did that, but I've come to appreciate it, at least. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think at the beginning, living in Ecuador, and that was something that was really helpful, I think, to us, is that we had both had time in each other's, we had both lived in each other's countries. aside from like before meeting each other. And so that has been something that's really helped us, I think. So time is a lot more flexible in Latin American cultures, like countries. And so we would go out on a date, or we just knew if you say 2:00, it's not 2:00, for whatever it is. I mean, school starts at the same time, but if you're meeting up with someone, it's probably not going to be actually that time. So we would go on a date, and my body was very used to like programmed, you eat breakfast at this time, you eat lunch at this time, and
traffic is horrible too.
Traffic is horrible. It's a city of 3 million people, so it's so he would pick me up, and then we'd be going to a restaurant. We knew that was a plan, but I would get so hungry on the way. What?
An hour later, and then we are still like on our way to the restaurant.
So anyway, I would definitely get hangry, and so we just learned to like stop and get a random ice cream cone that someone was selling on the side of the road, or like. So I think that also.
Something that I like when we were both living in Ecuador is we adopted, or me as an Ecuadorian adopted the Thanksgiving tradition.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So and my parents love the pumpkin pie that Christy used to make, and Christy was always on board because she's like, as long as your mom cooks the turkey, then we can do all the other side dishes. So I think that's something that my family in Ecuador really enjoy, that getting together, say what you're thankful and sharing a nice turkey and the pies and all the other traditional dishes that you guys do around that time of the year.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah,
that's fun. Yeah, I can say I've done like just a little travel to South American countries and Mexico, Bolivia, and Brazil, and that time thing, especially for an American, you're like, it's a shocker. Like I remember in Costa Rica, we always called it Tico time, because you're just like, all right, it starts at some time, we've got a target and it's going to be somewhere in that large target. But for someone that's like a type A, or like even always about this time, like it can be frustrating, and you have to learn like that cultural difference of like, I'm not going to get mad at people who aren't there on time because they just value people, things would be 90 minutes of time, but you're like, we're here 2-3 hours later because like the conversations matter and the people matter. And so it's not these cut and dry times, but even for me in like these little small pockets, you're like, okay, but this really rubs against like the way I do life and my culture is, and to like embrace some of that is, I'm sure, as you merge families and cultures, is an adventure,
Yeah.
So you ended up in Omaha. What was your experience then immigrating into becoming a U.S. citizen? Was that something that just was a long process while you were going through schooling, or what did that look like?
Yeah, we started that process as soon as we made the decision to come into the U.S. So, what were you going to say?
I think we did it before.
Well, no, we told the school like, yeah, we are no longer coming next year. So that's when we started doing the paperwork, and we stayed there for a year.
Yeah.
So the whole process took 14 months, I think.
Yeah.
And I think you can do it on your own, but we just didn't know, and we could have saved some money that way, but we did it with a U.S. lawyer that was specialized in immigration, and it took 14 months. They request a lot of paperwork from you, and sometimes you get, I don't know how often we got these letters from the U.S. government saying like, yeah, your case is moving along the pipeline, and or we'll get a call from the lawyer like saying, hey, we need this other paper. Do you guys have this? So then we just go to my parents to ask him, how do we get this other stuff that we need for the paperwork, and then send that to the lawyer. And that was like a 14-month process.
Wow.
And I think too, when you think about like a few things, is there was one point where all of our paperwork was lost in the mail somehow, and then like I think our lawyer responded and like, oh, there was a miracle. I opened up the mailbox, the locked mailbox, and all the lost paperwork was in there.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, it sounds like a little thing, like, oh, just get this paper, but like,
that was an answer to prayers. Like
dealing with two different governments is a lot. And then also, like, you have to get things. We got married here. So then we had to get everything, like, translated. And then there's money with that. And then
you have to pay the certification. It has to be a certain type of
apostille.
I don't know what it's called. And that costs more money. And
you have to go to the office, and then also just living in Ecuador, then you had to find someone that was going to the U.S. that could take all your paper with you. So,
oh, wow.
You know, it's I mean, everybody through marriage to a U.S. citizen can become a U.S. citizen, but it's a big process.
Yeah.
And something that meeting Marcos, something that was honestly attracted me to him was that he didn't want to live in the U.S. Like, he didn't want to get married to a U.S. citizen, because that does happen, right? Where people just want the green card or whatever, but he had no intentions of
I lived 2
dating.
years here before.
Yeah, of ever dating an American. So I was like, okay, actually, that works in my favor.
Well,
so.
you hear a lot of times that people will say, like, going through the immigration process, that like an American citizen who was born here probably couldn't even pass the tests and things like that because it's so involved and you have to know so much. Was that kind of your experience? Were you surprised by, was it challenging, or like when you look back in hindsight, are you like, wow, there's people that I live with in this country that don't know the things that I had to know to immigrate here?
So are you talking about the test that you got to take?
Yeah.
To be honest, to me it was easy because
okay, that's a good perspective.
I took American history back in high school.
Oh, okay.
And I love history, so I was still remembering, like, oh, I already know this, I know this and that. So I did take one of those online quizzes that you can take to see your knowledge more or less about the U.S. history, potential questions that they will ask you at your interview or citizenship. And I think I got like 40 out of 50. So I think I was like, I felt pretty comfortable with it.
Okay. Yeah.
So if Eric and I want to become Ecuadorian citizens,
we got a lot of work to do.
A lot of studying.
We're over there eating hamsters. That's the wrong animal.
We need to gift them with
especially for driver's license. Yeah. That's always the test. I mean, because Marcos was bilingual too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, easier when you speak the language,
an
right?
advantage there.
Yeah, there are definitely many advantages when you are familiar with the culture and you have the language. I think things are just easier.
Yeah. One of the things I get to do with my job is help premarital counseling and people that get married, and it's interesting when two people from the same city, right? Like, they're both from Omaha, they've lived in Omaha their whole life, and then we start talking about just families of origin, which are two totally different cultures in a lot of ways. And we start talking about how we do money, how we do discipline, how we value things, holidays, religion, all of that kind of stuff. Even that, they could live two neighborhoods apart, and that's very different. And, you know, you can run into conflict and differences. So I'm sure, like, in your own story, what were some of the things as you're meeting each other, you're dating in the process of that? Like everybody else that gets married has to wrestle through these things, but adding like another layer of different cultures. We've talked about some of that with time and things like that. What were some of the initial things that were maybe issues or things you had to work through or things you noticed about one another in that process that might be different than just two Americans running through this process of getting to know each other and dating and marriage?
A little thing is, in Ecuador, they're a lot less direct. And so in the U.S., we just say, like, what do you want? And you expect a direct, a sandwich or whatever. Yeah. And he would say, like, whatever is fine. I'm like, no, but what? But give me some idea. So it was hard at the beginning to figure out. And then I would say, well, do you want, I don't know, a sandwich or soup? And he would say, está bien, like, it's okay. And so then I would be frustrated because I felt like I didn't have an answer. Well, which one do you want? And so that's a really small thing, but
Yeah.
That it was his way of saying like, yes, but that's a really small example.
As you said at the beginning, I think each family has its own culture. So I think that's more what makes the difference rather than, living in a different country or, a different state, because you can have, like in our case, we had, our love for God. The fact that Christy spoke Spanish and I spoke English, that
really helpful.
Yeah, really helpful. We always had, I think we had the same, we did have the same view on money, how we tithe, why we do it, and how we spend our money, like not getting into debt, anything like that was related. So I think that all of those factors made it easier for us to continue with our relationship and ended up with each other for the rest of our lives. So, but yeah, I think those little cultural differences, like say me not being direct as you guys Americans are, I think that's one thing that definitely was a difference between us. But I don't think we have. I don't think it was that hard for us to find things that were issues between the two of us because of culture, but rather because of personalities. Yeah.
Are there any, I don't know, like I'm thinking of friendships or relationships like that. If you're getting married and living in another country, is it more difficult for, women in another country to say, oh, I want to accept you marrying a white woman, or as you come here, like, are there any family conflicts of like, yeah, this isn't how we thought you were going to marry a Hispanic guy or anything like that? Were there any of those, I guess, tropes or, things that I think sometimes even in our own country, I think we've grown in a lot of ways, but interracial marriage, was illegal, within this century. So I'm just curious, like inside of those types of things, if there's anything that you guys can think of or willing to share as far as relational outside of maybe your own families, but cultural dynamics.
I think I can share. I know that my family will listen to this and so I want to be really honest, and also honest about maybe this will come later, but I think a really big thing to know is, when you get into a relationship, when you commit to a relationship cross-culturally, whether in the U.S., in the same country or in a different country, you're not just committing for yourself, but your whole family is committing to it. So if your family's on board, I don't know what that would look like. Our families have been on board, but it's been definitely a learning process for them. And has taken it's required sacrifice on their part too, and understanding different cultures. So, for sure, it was not easy. I was the first one in my household to get married. And so there were just a lot of pieces. I mean, I remember when I was in high school and I told my mom that I was attracted to Latinos. Maybe not the best thing to tell your mom when you're in high school and you're going on like mission trips in high school. And, I know I can understand now as a mom how that might have felt.
Yeah.
But it was hard. Yeah, it was hard because I was living in Ecuador, and then I just called my parents maybe once a week. And so they didn't get to experience, they didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
It makes sense. They had no idea. They knew who their daughter was, but they didn't know. And they knew that the daughter was changing as I lived in another culture.
Yeah.
And so, and really formative years of my life. And so it was hard.
Yeah, I'd imagine it'd be scary.
It was really hard. Yeah.
Takes a lot for a parent who maybe potentially has expectations for their child and for whatever good or bad reasons.
Right.
But then to also be able to relinquish that control that they want to have and say, okay, well, I guess I have to trust my child to make a good decision,
Yeah.
So
and I trusted
they've
myself.
Never seen you dating before you.
Also, he was my first relationship ever.
Yeah.
So all the dynamics. Yeah. So it was just, that was really hard. Like they came to visit me, and they met him when we had just been dating basically a month. And then I came back. He came to the U.S. and it was just...
I was invited to the family vacation. So
2 weeks of intense family
questioning?
time.
Yeah. Or no, just, yeah.
So, yes. Yeah, there was a lot that...
What was that like for you, Marcos? Like, what was your experience?
Being onboarded into Christy's family, I think that particular trip that we made during the summertime, I think that was difficult, and I was starting actually a new job at where Christy was working as I was the network administrator for that school, and the person who was working before me, he was like, well, I'm gonna be I'll be back to the US for good, so you're gonna be responsible for this and that. So a lot of changes happened while we were in the US, so I was worried about that. And we didn't have all the technology that we have now in place for me to check on how things are doing back at the school. So I was worried, and I was like, what's happening as I am here? So and then we were I was expecting just to meet Christy's family, I spent more time with Christy's sister, mom and dad, but then we ended up going to Minnesota, and I started more meeting like cousins, uncles, and so I learned a lot about the Midwestern culture too over there. Like when I was living in California or Maryland, I was never offered milk as an option to drink with your supper, and over there's like, do you want milk with your lasagna? Do you guys have water or soda or juice? That's fine. So that was something different. But yeah, it was stressful. And I am more of an introvert, and Chris is more of an extrovert. So I remember your mom and your dad saying like, hey, you've spent here like maybe a little bit more than a week, and we still haven't been able to see who you really are. And so on the trip back home from Minnesota to Omaha, that's when, we just, they asked me a whole bunch of
You're trapped
questions.
in the car.
Yep.
And you got all the questions coming at you. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about religion, talk about, my experience with Jesus and how I came to know the Lord, my testimony, and things like that. So, a lot of interesting questions and hard questions. And I was like, well, I hopefully I did well. And when I came back, to Ecuador after the trip, my mom and dad asked, so how did you go? Did you just enjoy your time with her? And I'm like, I did, but I wasn't so sure if our relationship was going to continue or not. And I told that to my parents. So they were like, oh, we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was probably the really hardest moment of our dating.
Yeah.
The most decisive, I guess, the time that we really said, all right, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think it probably is for a lot of people once you like meet the parents, but you're like, I'm going to a whole nother country. I'm spending money all this time. I got a new job and all this stuff. And then you're just, that pressure is just mounting even more when you're getting like into those deep questions. And then you're like, I don't know how they feel about it. Like you don't always get that instant feedback. So thanks for being honest about that.
Yeah, my English wasn't as good as, it was good, but I didn't have the need to speak English in Ecuador. So just until I started dating Christy and then going and work for that American school.
There would be times that I knew that he, in that vacation, that I knew that's not what he meant to say.
Yeah, like articulate it.
Right.
Yeah.
But then if I didn't also want to clarify for him, because then it looked like I was like stepping in to explain it.
Yeah.
So
I understand what you mean.
Those dynamics were super hard in the beginning stages.
Yeah, I could only, and that's like just a different level of when even communication, language is a barrier.
Yes.
Yeah.
In meeting other people, you guys understand each other, but that's another fascinating.
They're like, you're not getting the picture that I'm getting of him, and that might influence, how you perceive your maybe future son-in-law, and
Yeah.
So all those crazy dynamics.
What are some of the other challenges that you may have experienced? Whether that's, I mean, did you feel like you experienced a lot of prejudice or anything like that? And or was it more? Did you feel accepted in America? Or, I mean, even then or now, I mean, we have such a kind of tumultuous political climate all the time with so many things that you read in headlines, and you just wonder, like, how has that affected you and your relationship? And do you, is that something that you feel comfortable with, safe with most of the time? Or is it, because I think a lot of times people either are going to read news or headlines or look at the culture one way or another and just say, this is the way it is. But I'd love to hear maybe even your perspective on how you...
And in my case, I don't think I felt that prejudice against me for looking different or speaking with an accent. But I don't know. Like, I think I kind of have like an advantage. My wife is white. Most of my social environment is white. So I don't have that many friends from, like South America or, like any Latin friends. We do have some friends in common, but, I'm always like associated more with
the majority culture.
Yeah,
right.
And I try to be involved in this culture as much as I can, because that's the reality for myself, and my family. And so I try to integrate as much as I can, and so that's I don't know, I haven't, but I know that's different from other people. Yeah.
I think a few like tropes that you hear out just in culture living in the US is everybody outside of the US just wants to come to America. You guys have talked a little bit about that. Wasn't your goal, or, people just get married for a green card, or, that maybe there's others that you've heard. Like, what are other maybe myths that are just out there about cross-cultural marriages that you could help us who have not been in one, or who haven't heard it, or haven't been on the backside of comments or, things like that, to help us understand around a few of those things?
I think we've heard before, that these types of marriages are more likely to fail. On the flip side, also, like, we just need love. That's all you need to make it through. So kind of both extremes, which I don't think either, it doesn't have to be either way. Like Marco said, I think we had a lot of values in common. And we also knew a lot about each other's culture. So that has been really helpful in the journey, I would say.
And in my case, like I was happy just by being a resident, because, it allowed me to lawfully live in this country, have a job, be able to support my family. And, I didn't see, the need to become a citizenship, because I kind of have like that in the back of my mind, like, people are just gonna judge you because there's a reason why you came to the U.S. Just to get an American citizenship. So we delayed that for as much as we could. I mean, so I think that's, it might be true for other people, but I think for most persons, I don't think that's the case.
So let's talk a little bit about parenting styles and how your family dynamics work. Is it? I think some people would be curious. You're both bilingual, so what language is spoken in the home, and like, is it encouraged to speak both languages? Are the kids learning both languages, or how does that interaction happen?
I think I gotta give big thanks to Christy on this, because she's really been the driving force for us to speak only Spanish at home. So at home we just speak Spanish. That's how we do it. So if we read books, we have English and Spanish books, but our kids mostly tend toward the Spanish-speaking books. When we do TV or stuff like that, it's always, they will be like, hey, this thing is in English. Can you change it to Spanish? So that at home, that's the main language, I think.
Yeah.
What made you make that decision? Because I think oftentimes I would assume the inverse is like, no, Marcos, you came to our country and this is the language we speak and this is the language I want our kids to learn because that's the majority language. So what went into like, that sounds like some level of sacrifice, right? So like what went into, for you to make that decision?
I would say life experience and experience as an educator. So in Ecuador, I worked at an English-speaking school, and it was all in English. They had classes in Spanish, just like a Spanish class. But we had native Spanish speakers, kids from South Korea, kind of all over, and then some native English speakers. But classes were all in English. But I just saw how... So our plan, if we had kids in Ecuador, which we didn't, was going to be that I was going to speak in English and he was going to speak in Spanish. Kids at recess would still be mostly speaking in Spanish. But we wanted a way to support both languages. So when we moved here, I wound up, Omaha has some dual language schools, which I had no idea until I moved here. So they get half of the day in English and half of the day in Spanish, all the normal content. If you're in fourth grade, you get fourth grade content in English, and then you get the other things in Spanish. So I actually took a position teaching in Spanish in third grade, which was a whole nother experience, whole nother level of language learning. Yeah. So seeing that, I just saw how hard, even with them getting like classes in Spanish and in English, it was still a fight to keep Spanish because of how dominant English is. And so we just decided when we have kids, we're going to only speak in Spanish to continue supporting that, because his family doesn't, his sister is bilingual, multilingual, but his parents and stuff, if they wanted a relationship with their grandkids, they were going to have to speak Spanish. So we realized to keep those family ties, we have to support Spanish.
It's a very intentional decision.
Super intentional. Yeah. And it feels very countercultural, for sure. We're always thinking about like how much language input are they getting, like in Spanish, what is coming in language-wise. And thinking about how to continue growing that for them.
What about food? How do you have does everybody have the same favorite meals, or do you guys kind of switch it up quite a bit between maybe cultural favorites or?
There's a lot of rice in Ecuador. So we have more rice than the average American family, I would say. Marcos is a great cook. We kind of both do some of, I don't know. We don't do that many Ecuadorian dishes.
Yeah. Your kids haven't experienced guinea pig yet.
No. No. And if anyone gives us one, we're not doing that. So, yeah.
But I think there's like this soup that you like and the boys like.
Yeah.
It's called locro de chochos. And chochos might be, not a good word in another Spanish-speaking countries, but in Ecuador it's just like this white bean. I think Italians call it lupini beans. So that's how we made the soup. It's a potato soup mixed with this thing, and it's very good.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about just. It sounds like you were both very intentional about your love for Christ and your faith, and that made your relationship work.
Yeah.
How has that helped concept in your home too, just to be kind of a unified front for your children and leading the household that way. Does it have your different cultural backgrounds conflicted with that at all, or because you were rooted in Christ, it seemed to be like you had similar goals for your kids?
Yeah, I think so. So, for example, Spanish Christian resources for kids here in the U.S. are not that abundant. So Chris is always researching what books can we purchase our kids to, that have like that Christian content, but good content, so we can share with them. And you found 6 or 7, and it's funny because one of these books, it's in Spanish, and it tells the story of Jesus and all the stuff that he did and how this relates to modern age and things like that. But that's how our kids have accepted Christ in their life, or 2 boys with the same book, different times. So that was nice and awesome to see that something that she put a lot of effort and time to finding the a good resource for us to be able to share the gospel with our kids. It has brother or 2 boys to Christ. So that's been awesome. We also really enjoy the devotionals that kids are being sent from the church here, Christ Community Church. Yeah. We work on those every night, and they make good questions, and it's cool to see how their minds are thinking, how they respond to those questions. So it's really nice to see that they're getting the gospel, they're getting the message, and they're worried about their neighbor, and they're like, I want to bring my friends to church, and we encourage them, like, you can share your love for Jesus to them. I mean, you just gotta be be a good buddy to your friends, and invite them to church, and that they're open to that stuff like that. So
I don't know that we've really had any cultural like that has not really felt like an issue faith wise. I mean, I think, I don't know, I struggle a lot. I guess I question American faith. Just I think a lot about it culturally, like how much is like what Jesus is saying and how much is just what we're doing in the American church, or just what we're used to, right? Like customs and things. And is that following Jesus, or is that just custom, which is okay too? So seeing that played out differently a little bit in Ecuador is, it's helpful to be able to know that this is to kind of filter through, like, what we want is a gospel-based marriage, and we don't want a Christian, American Christian marriage,
version of what that looks like.
Exactly. So,
and I think that's one of the things, we can always grow in it, but one of the things I appreciate, and I think why we try to engage people in other cultures, and in missions efforts, isn't to go be quote unquote white saviors, but also like some of the most fruitful experiences I've had that have broadened my view of who Jesus is, and how, in the view of what it means to be made in the image of God, are seeing how he's worshiped and how services happen in other cultures and languages, because I just come to expect that, no, this is how Christ Community Church does it, and that's it. And even for my kids, even in 2 white different churches, I preached a couple weeks ago at a different church and took my kids to another church, and it was like culture shock for them. Like they've grown up in a white mega church, like, and taking them to even a smaller church where like they get there and the classroom doubles, and even moments like that remind me of like the importance of to be able to expand our capacity to know who God is. We have to be able to see who God is in other cultures and get outside of these little boxes and bubbles of comfortability that we create. So I think it's awesome, that you guys are running after that in your own kids' lives and helping them understand in different heart language. But that's a tension I wrestle with too, is like how much of this is we created it and we think it's good because it's comfortable versus like, but the church is so global and we just get such tunnel vision for how we do it. And then we call that success. And so that's getting into a whole nother topic, but
it's good.
I'd love to hear just as we close, there's so many more questions we haven't gotten to, but if you guys just had thoughts or you're looking back towards your younger selves or thoughts for other people that are wrestling through just a marriage, obviously you can't do one-to-one, but with somebody in a different culture, or they're in a relationship with somebody in a different culture, what kind of feedback or advice would you give them as they're taking this journey together and growing together? I think you've given a lot of things to think about already with different language and how you support that in the home, but what are some things you'd give for advice?
I think one thing that we didn't talk about is being in a relationship or like committing to a relationship with cross-culturally can have a big effect on your budget. So depending on some families aren't able to go back to their home country because of safety and different concerns or political environments. Some people aren't allowed, but if those are things to work through as a couple. Like, you know, every time we travel, it's his sister and her brother-in-law, they live in Switzerland now. So like we've got 3 continents going, which not complaining about going to either place, but
it's not cheap though.
It's not cheap at all. So that's just it's a wonderful facet, but it's also, it impacts how you spend your money if that's what if you're committed to going back to visit family.
Yeah, I think you touched on, counseling. So I think we had what they call it, pre-engagement counseling.
Yeah, we got pre-engagement counseling, which was great.
Yeah, that was a nice thing for us to, that have that benefit from our pastors back in Ecuador. And it helped us, navigate our relationship or like expose maybe potential issues that might arise because of our differences, in cultures and things like that. And especially, differences with personality. So we at the end of this course, I remember that we just had a really hard conversation where we asked like really tough questions between the two of us. And our pastors were like, well, if things go well past that point, then I think you guys are fit to get married. Otherwise, I think that will give you like a good sign for you guys to just, break up and stop wasting your time in each other. So I think that's good. Try to get as much counseling as you can because you can never go wrong with that.
And I think just keep asking questions and talking to each other through things. Yeah. If you have, can I share something really quick?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so just kind of a really great picture of different cultural things that can happen. So we were getting married in Omaha, Nebraska. I had already been up here. Marcos was on his way. My parents had reached out because his family was coming. He had family coming from Florida. He had family coming from Ecuador. So my parents had reached out to friends and had said, hey, do you mind if Marcos's family, like, you're going to be out of town? And they said, hey, we'll give up, like, our house. They can stay at our house so they don't have to spend money on a hotel and everything. So we said, great. So then just a few nights before the wedding, I mean, that was a plan and everything. And then it came out that I'm talking to Marcos on Skype or whatever back in the day. Yeah. So, and then he said, oh, well, my family from Florida, family. And Latin cultures is not mom, dad, sister, brother. It's family.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah, they're staying at your parents' friend's house. And I'm like, wait a minute. No. It was going to be your mom, dad, brother, sister. That's who we're counting on to be there. And he said, well, I don't know if they're going to be able to come if it's like if they have to all of a sudden spend money on a hotel now too, because at least people from Florida are also planning on being there. And so I said, well, where are they going to sleep? They'll sleep on the floor. It doesn't matter. We're Latinos. It doesn't matter. We'll just make it happen. We'll all be in there together. It'll be a great time. So then I was like having this panic attack, well, now I was balancing both, like, okay, that's going to help them out. But then now my parents' friends, so then I had to talk to my parents and say, actually, so then they said, okay, let's talk to our friends about that. And they said, oh, yeah, it's fine. But there was this in between that was horrible a few days before, all this stuff that you're thinking through anyway, right before you get married. But this horrible tension of like, I'm very in between trying to manage this, but there's this cultural difference that we hadn't thought about ahead of time.
Yeah.
So
I think that's fascinating. And I'm sure that's just one of many, many of the stories. So in closing, unless you have other things to say, I'd love to just hear what you both love most about each other's culture. What's the thing you've come to admire, or you've loved the most about one another's culture, and you're like, to your kids, this is the good thing about American culture. This is a good thing about Ecuadorian culture. If you're teaching them and loving them.
So I like how safe it is here. Like I can just go for a run with my Apple Watch, my headphones on, and don't worry about that I'm gonna be jumped on and stripped all of my belongings. So that's one thing that I appreciate a lot. The safety, how everything works like a clockwork. Yeah, it's important to me too. That's something that I didn't grow up with, and so I really appreciate it. I love music, so I love the amount of concerts and artists that you can see here in the U.S. So that's something that I appreciate a lot, and I love the fact that the U.S. created the hamburger, because that's like my favorite meal. So
there you go.
Yeah.
I think as far as people-wise, culturally, like you said, Alex, people really value other people and spending time together, and it's very social. There are it's a social culture, and so you are with people. You don't find people alone. So that's something that I really appreciate, is people spend time with other people. As far as in Ecuador, being there, living there, there's so much to do. You can go to a volcano over the weekend. You can bike down the mountain. You can hike mountains. You can go to the jungle. You can go to the beach. So there's so much biodiversity. There's so much to do there.
And probably don't have to reschedule for snowstorms.
No. There's lots of, it depends.
You deal with earthquakes.
Okay.
Volcano explosions.
A little trade-off.
Every now and then.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
That's awesome. And I feel like we could go on and on. It's like a learning experience, because I think there's just so much that I want to absorb from hearing your experience. And I'm encouraged, and I hope that others that are listening can be encouraged to just know that the tropes and the assumptions that people make are just not true a lot of times, and that there's so much to gain when we invite other cultures into our country and into our lives. And there's I don't know, it's exciting to me to think that in a world that can be really divisive, that there's just practical implementations of these people living their lives out this way around us. And it's so awesome. And I'm encouraged by your bravery to just come on this podcast. We just said, hey, do you want to come talk about this? And it was awesome. So thank you guys for doing that. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap things up here, or anything that you feel like you'd really like to share?
If I can just add to that, I think a huge thing is just ask questions. Just, good to know there's probably one person around you that's from a different cultural, religious, socioeconomic status. Like, we're all humans, we're all searching for deep connections with others and with Jesus. Yeah. And so just getting to know instead of getting involved in just getting to know people goes a long way, and then, like you said, like little by little, it really changes your perspective on
the power of asking a question and then all of that fear and prejudice that someone might have can just be wiped away so quickly. And I think it's almost magical, but it's just, I don't think people realize that. Sometimes it's scarier to ask the question. They just rather hold on to their own preconceived notions or comfortability. So thanks again, guys. Really appreciate your time. And thanks to everyone who's listening. If you have any questions or concerns, or you'd like to reach out to us, you can do that as always by sending us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or on Instagram or TikTok, you can reach out to us at CCCOMA podcast, or if you want to leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930, you can do that. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.